course. I'm just waiting for your cue.
So very warm welcome to you, ma'am, in our interview session. So we're delighted to have you in our interview. So
The delight is mutual. No one.
Thank you for accepting our request. So let me just briefly introduce Palak Sharma, ma'am. She did her master's from London School of Economics, and further she cracked UK Civil Services examination, and finally she decided to come back India for the betterment of the common people. So let's just have a conversation with Palak Sharma, ma'am. So my first question to you, ma'am, is that what inspires you most, like to do for the upliftment, or to do the work for the upliftment of the society? Like, what inspires you most?
Right. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Ashima. I don't think I deserve most of it, especially the part where we mentioned upliftment. So I'm very much against this word. I mean, no offense, but I just feel that we are all somehow equal in different capacities. What I have, someone else might not have, but what someone else has, I might lack absolutely. So I believe that the full concept that we are working towards is equality. And everything that we work towards, every policy that comes into action, every step that you take individually, I take individually, should be something that should work towards reducing the inequalities which are inherently present. One thing that has actually pushed me to pursue this path specifically was I actually call myself very directionless, because I just want to be like everywhere. But when I was working with my father for a few of his on-site projects, I realized like how he used to go out, because he was in a government administration. So I used to notice how he used to go beyond his own responsibilities to help people out in whatever ways he can, when he was, for example, implementing a particular policy. So I used to see how he used to interact with people. And then what happened was I realized I did not have that kind of unidirectional approach. So I started reaching out to different kind of volunteering organizations. I started working for all and every causes. It was only when I was working for National Service Scheme, the NSS scheme that we have by the Ministry of Youth Affairs, when I realized that there's actually a need for something like a single directional way where I should move. So that's when I thought that if I want to work with implementing small ideas on social development with members of parliament, I actually need something more direct to reach out to them. And that's how I thought my role in the whole development sector should be to make things accessible for everyone. So if I, as a young person, couldn't access a member of parliament's office, my job now is to make it easy for other people to access those kind of things. So my motivation is purely accessibility.
Yes, ma'am. So my second question to you, ma'am, is that you are having a culture of excellence at your home. So what about that kind of children who don't have any kind of culture of excellence in their families? What kind of motivation that you would given to those kind of children, that what should they do for the for their for upliftment of society first, and for their education as well, like those don't have any kind of culture of excellence?
Right. So I think it comes from internal motivation.
Like your father
Sorry?
Is having a good post, okay, and having a culture of excellence in your family. So you getting motivation out of your family.
Right.
But what about those children who belongs to the very less socio-economic classes and having no culture of excellence at their home? So what kind of motivation that you would give into those children?
I think it's not my place to give them motivation. As I said, my place is to give them accessibility. So any one of us who's from the outside, we have to stop assuming that we can just, go at some place and tell someone what to do, because that is what we are doing wrong till now. Our job is not to tell them what to do. Our job is to facilitate them in doing what they want to do. So if I see someone and I see that they are sparked about probably becoming an engineer or a doctor, or maybe just becoming a teacher, My job becomes to just make it easier for them to pursue what they want. So I wouldn't tell them anything. I would just tell them that people like us, we are here. In case you need any help from us, we want to be there for you. We are standing behind you. So if you fall back because of the problems that you're facing, we are there to catch you. That's pretty much it.
Ma'am, my question is that the children who don't have any kind of their parents are not well educated. They don't have enough income to getting a good good education in a qualified or recognized university. So how they get in recognized online platforms also, they don't unlock the exact information. Like you are an educator, top educator on an academy. So there is the fees like enrollment fees. So how they pay for it and like that. So my question is that.
Right. So the very best thing about education and knowledge right now is that most of it is free. We tend to believe that, only if you pay on an academy, you're going to get something out of it. But the fact
Yes.
is there are excellent things which are available for free. YouTube is the biggest source of information that you could ever get. So if someone has access to internet, and if the only problem is coming in the form of payment, I think the best thing to do is explore YouTube as much as possible. Right. If you see someone who's knowledgeable enough, if you want them to mentor you, reach out to them on their social platforms. Because at this point of time, as I said, accessibility is the key to get things done. So if you saw me or any other educator on YouTube and you want to talk to them and know more about the kind of things they know and want to build a knowledge bank like them, the best thing to do is reach out to them on their socials. Drop a message on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, ask them genuine questions. And if you are genuinely someone who needs knowledge, I'm very sure people are willing to give them.
Ma'am, children having so much doubt regarding that. Most of the educator or top educator told about that if you need much more information or unlock the information, you just have to subscribe our channel or subscribe our an academy. You just have to need a subscription. So, ma'am, children having doubt regarding it, like we should have to be like pay for it and all about. So what kind of things they should have to be like adopt?
Right. So I wouldn't exactly say why an academy does this or why should anyone do it, because that's not my place to say. And this is not like, a conversation on an academy. But as much as I would like things to be free, we have to assume that people who run these things have families to take care of. Right. So it's basically that they get paid for it, they care for their families, and it's just randomly how capitalism works, because nothing is free. What we can do, or what students who want to learn more can do, as I said, reach out to these educators personally, they might help you. B, in case you cannot do it, I think education is something that can be built without constant assistance from someone. You don't have to restrict yourself to an academy if you find that it is asking money from you, if it is paid. If you want education even greater than what an academy offers, if you want to go to other resources like international universities, go to Coursera, write a financial aid application. It's just like 300 words. You write 300 words and they give you a financial aid. So you don't have to pay for that course, but you're getting a certification from international universities. So if anyone has internet to access, the best thing to do is search for free knowledge wherever you can. There are a lot of open access platforms. Use them.
Yes, ma'am. So my next question is, you don't think that India lags behind only because of it, that there is a culture of having a free education in Europe side and in Asia side, there is too much pay for the education, for a good education, like families having this kind of problem, like a normal family or a kind of noble family, just having the 2 to 3 children, okay,
Right.
and they don't have to be much money for paying one children for their studies.
Right.
So what do you think that we lag behind somewhere down the line because of it, like too much paying for the studies only?
I think it has to do with
We should
how.
have to do.
Yes,
We
please.
should have to do for that also or not. Like our civil servants do for the upliftment of the society or policy making. So we should have a policy like we should have a policy of free education. So much of the burden get decreases from the parents' head.
Right. So we
Like we
definitely
can.
have right to education, no? So if we talk about the basic primary education, it's free in India, technically. So you don't have to pay. If you go to a government school, you don't pay. That's one thing. But then we all understand the state of government schools. That is understandable. That it's not very up to the mark. You were saying something? Were you? Yeah. So it is, I mean, I get your point where you're coming from, and I absolutely understand what you're trying to say. So my facts on this would be, things didn't begin like this in India.
My question is that we can can we make any policy like regarding it to for free education in India also? Like we can taking their policies in India. Like Europe is much more successful than Asia. So can we make any policy regarding
So see,
it?
that's why I'm saying that you have to go a little bit back into history. If you look into this, if you are trying to look into a comparison between Asia and Europe, I think we really need to look back on this because, see, we were not like this since inception. Since the beginning, we were not a country like this. We were not starved. We were not hungry, and we were not in this state. Most of it is given to colonization. And European countries flourish because A, they have smaller population, and B, they have monies that they have taken from their colonies and they can use it properly to fund different kind of things, right? But a country like India, which has already been, exhausted of its financial resources and then has an overburdening population, tends to find it difficult to, give everything away for free. But the good thing is that we are working towards things like these. What I believe should be done instead of this is, see, the problem is not the lesser availability of school education. When it comes to educational statistics, if you look into the numbers, you would realize the problem is not that the schools are not there or education is not there. Problem is mostly that people are not willing to send their kids to schools, right? And to counter this, a lot of Asian countries also, Middle Eastern countries, are trying to do this conditional cash transfer thing. It is a policy of CCT. What they do in this policy is that if you send your kid to school, we would be transferring, $200 per year to your bank account. So this is happening in Egypt. One of my friends, she's working with the Ministry of Education on this policy, and the pilot has been immensely successful. The good part about this is parents, especially ones that come from lower economic background, tend to care more about the monetary benefits of a certain thing than the future economic benefits. That if you'll educate your son or daughter, they will earn eventually. They're not that much interested in that aspect, but they are more interested in, like, if you give me money right now, it'll fill my stomach, it'll help me run my family. So that is one way in which we can probably move forward. Conditional cash transfers are a good way to do it. If you remember Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, if you know about that scheme, you would notice that it is also a CCT. If you give birth to a girl child and raise her till 18 years of age, you will get a certain amount of money. So that becomes a condition, right? Ki ye karoge to ye milega. So these kind of things work out. Maybe we can work towards something like this in future if we have enough cash to give to people, considering the economic situation we are in right now. But hopefully this is one way we can work towards.
Thank you so much. Abhinav, you can ask your question to you.
Yeah, so hello, ma'am.
Hello.
My first question to you is that, would you like to share, any of your most memorable childhood moment? In the terms, in a way that any moment of your childhood time, which help you to build your personality. or you still like remember those moments?
Right. So I think my most important childhood memory, and the person who's like the most important person to me, was the most important person to me, has to be my grandfather, my Dadaji. So he was one person with whom I used to share like every little bit of my achievement. And I think that was my reason to achieve, because I just wanted to rush to him and share the news with him and, see him react in a certain way. And that was what motivated me to write poetry, to, go and achieve something in school, go to debates, write an essay competitions. He was an English lecturer. So it was easier for me to, convince him that, okay, just teach me how to write in English. So when I was in, I think, in second standard, he made me go through all the, English grammar rules, everything, tenses and adjectives and conjunctions and everything. And then he used to ask me like, okay, then write your essay now. So we used to write essays on small topics and everything. And I think that's where I was, eventually in the process of being built as a writer or as a person who wants to express themselves. So my expression, I think it comes from that memory of sharing everything with him.
Well, that's quite interesting. Like my second question is that since you got offered from to work as an executive officer at UK Civil Services, and then you came back to India. So, what was like source of inspiration for you? Because like for most of the youth, they have this kind of mindset that if they get good job, good salary, then they get satisfied with that, and that too when you are very young, 23 years old. So would you like to share your experience, like what motivated you for that?
Sure. I think I have still not yet come to the place where I can look back at it and, speak in retrospect, because I'm kind of living it even now. So just a couple of months ago, I got this like second round, because what happens is once you let go of an offer, they keep your database for the next 12 months. So just 2 months ago, I received another offer from another department at UK Civil Services. So it's kind of a fresh wound even now. It's not very old, so I cannot look at retrospect and say that, I did it because of that. But all I can say is that I did feel motivated enough to do it. I felt that if I were doing this, I mean, if I were in the UK Civil Services and I was constantly working 9 to 5 on this job, I wouldn't feel the amount of satisfaction I would feel if I get, I go back and, actually invest myself out in the field. And the reason why you mentioned, like, because you've mentioned the young and age thing, I would also bring it here that I keep on saying it in every interview that I give, that when you're young, it is the time to take opportunities. It is the time to take risks. If I were 35 and if I were offered a job like this in the UK Civil Services, I wouldn't think twice before taking it up. But because I'm 23, I know that I have enough time to, if I lose this job right now, I can, do some random stuff and then again come back to a job like this. I believe myself, ki itna to I can do in future. So at this point of time, I think it's worth the risk. I somehow, when there are lowest moments of my life, I just wrote it today on my social media that when I feel really low, I look back and regret that, it's better than just struggling like this. And I wish I would have taken that. When I see people just hyping up anyone who gets into civil services, I just feel like, I could have done it. I just left it. But I also realized that maybe that's not my calling. My calling comes from actually being, completely submerged in work, in social affairs. So yeah, so be it.
Yeah, so my next question is that I was reading about you that you have won the National Geography Olympiad. So, and then you are writing a book on geography. So how you see that journey, like being Olympiad winner to being a writer?
Oh, this is like seriously unexpected, this whole journey. But I was in love with geography since I could, do anything. Like if I could read, the first thing I wanted to read was maps. If I was like, having the book of SST in my hand with a period which was going to be about social studies, my wish was that let's come to the geography part soon. So I don't know, it's kind of inherent, the idea to pursue geography. I was in 10th standard, I guess, when I won the geography Olympiad. And I mean, if you just passed your undergrad, you must be really fresh with your school memories, where there are always Olympiads around physics and chemistry and maths and everything. But geography Olympiad is such a different and rare thing. So when I got to know about this Olympiad, I was super excited, super amped up. That okay, this is my chance. Maths and everything, it's cool, but I really want to do this. So I started, I almost mugged up the entire atlas. I was almost like it was inside me. Oxford Atlas was there. There was no page I didn't know, and I think since that moment, I was like completely in the move to go towards geography. When I went for my undergrad, I took geography as my second subject, minor. So my majors was in economics, but my minors was geography. And that's when I actually got to know about theories and everything. And I realized that it's not just about maps, it's about more stuff. And when I actually seriously started writing poetry, I was kind of drawn to write about geography. I wanted to write poetry, but I wanted it to be about geography. So when I wrote my book, So This Is How I Die of Wandering, I made it up. I don't know, I didn't even think of it, but it just automatically came out of this place where geography resided inside me. And I would also say that Unacademy played a very crucial role in reminding me of how important geography is, because I was taking economics and English. But then just one lecture I took on geography made me realize how much I wanted to do it and how good the people were in their responses. So I continued taking up more lectures. I did series on learning the world maps. And from there, my interest rose to actually write about it. So when I was approached by this publishing house to write a book on one academic subject, either economics or public policy, I turned down both of them and chose to write instead on geography, because I felt like this is the place where I would never get bored out of. I might think that, it's becoming too economics and too public policy. I don't want to write anymore. But if it is geography, I think I'll never be bored out. So yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I would like to share like one of my experience. Like
Sure.
I guess 1 year back, I got to know about your lessons at Unacademy. I was yeah, so I was going through that and I just checked your like bio, like introduction part. So there I saw that you also wrote a book, and then I searched more about you. Then I got to know that you have won the poetry competition as well, and you have worked as UK civil servant as well. So I was like really surprised that how a person can do so many things. But I was surprised because you are doing a lot of things, like you teach also, you work for policy as well. So my question is like how you manage everything, like because most of time what happen is that I also write like to write the poetries, but I just think that tomorrow I will write, or just I try to delay it. So how you manage everything, and second is that how you get motivation, like I have to do all the things. Yeah.
So I'm a bad time manager. I'm not really good at it. I just divide my days. So what I do is I make specific days of the week for specific work. So Monday is basically for replying to all the emails, all the pending things that I have to just write out, basically corresponding, nothing more, because Monday is like the dullest day of the week. By Tuesday, I become a little amped up, so I choose to write. So Tuesday and Wednesday, I basically write the academic part of the book. When it comes to, as you said, to poetry, I think I'm a very, moment of the action kind of person. So when it comes to writing anything like this, anything creative, I usually do it when I feel like. So it might be, right before I'm sleeping. It could be right after I have showered. It could be any time. But it's just something, if there's a thought, there's a tiny speck of a thought inside me, I would take it out as soon as I can. So like writing poetry specifically is not something that comes very, in a very managed way to me. So as I was telling about the management thing, apart from writing poetry, so what I do is allocate days. So Friday and Saturday become for things like these, talking to people, doing the interviews, and all of this stuff which I have to do with external people. And my research oriented works usually come on Thursdays. That's how I plan it. So I do not tend to divide the day into different brackets because it becomes bad for me. It's better to divide for me the entire week, so that way it becomes easier to work out. I hope I answered your question though, right?
Yeah, pretty much you answered. So, like my next question is that, do you had like any teacher that motivated you or inspired you? Like not now, like from school time or college time.
Okay. So of course, my grandfather, he was the most important person who ever inspired me to do anything. But since he passed away in my 12th standard, I kind of felt like this lack of, he didn't guide me exactly. He was the person who just let me be me. And I think that's the biggest thing a teacher could do. Because usually when it comes to, mentoring, it comes to teaching, we just tend to believe that, someone will just come and tell us what to do. But I guess it's less about telling someone what to do and more about supporting someone in whatever they do. And I think after him, the second person who did that for me was during my undergrad, the HOD for my department from economics. Her name was Professor Divya Mishra. We're still in touch, and I like, if I have a good news, when I got to know 2 months ago I'm getting the Diana Award, she was the first person externally with whom I shared the news. But I think it's with her also, the biggest thing is that she lets me be me. She doesn't tell me that you should do this because you can do it, why don't you do this. She never does that. She just she leaves me, and she just waits for me to come back with something happy or something sad sometimes, because I'm not always successful in whatever I do. But whatever I come with, success, failure, she's always ready to accept me. And I think acceptance is something that makes a great teacher and a mentor. So she is the second person after my granddad who is really very close to me.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. I would like to ask you that, like now also, yeah, like you are doing so many things. So there must be like somehow few people who must be criticizing about whatever you are doing, because there are some people who always do. So how respond to those people, or how you react to those people? Because sometimes it happens like you are feeling really down, you are affected by some situation, and then if someone says you something, you usually get affected. So would you like to share?
True. No, I'm super sensitive. If someone just says a single bad thing to me, I just feel like crying. In fact, I should tell you, like today, I had just got this one response on one of my social media stories that I don't remember the exact words, but the person was like, yeah, what are we supposed to do if you left civil services? Don't tell me you did it for India. And then this person said that, so sorry for I'm giving the statutory trigger warning for bad language. This person said fake AF bitch. And it really hurt me because I was like, no, I never said I did it for India. I never did it for you. I did it because something didn't motivate me about that job. Something motivated me about starting my own organization and working for SDGs. So it's not about you, it's about like my choice. But my choice comes from a certain place and I don't have to explain it to you. But I really wanted to write a long ass paragraph about why this person is hurting me. But I just thought that it didn't matter to him or her because it was a fake account. It's just like someone superficial trying to attack me. But when this criticism comes very close to home, when we realize that this person is someone very close to us, that's when it actually hurts. So I'm not going to deny that choosing this kind of career is or was easy for me, because it instantly doesn't become very agreeable, especially when you are a potentially good candidate for, let's say, civil services or other examinations. Your parents, your relatives, they just set certain expectations that you have to do this because you're intelligent, you have to do this. But I guess for me, it was always my internal motivation to do something which is not mainstream and something which runs my something which fuels my life. So for me, that was always working in the social impact sector. And when anyone criticizes, even now, like I know a few people who say that, so what if she has done this, so what, how is it any beneficial for us? So I'm like, I just want to, listen to all of it, take it all in, and just bury it somewhere deep inside me. And that's what I do. I never go back to it and turn back to it until and unless I'm totally depressed and totally, hopeless in my life. But if it's someone who's distant to me, probably a relative or a friend or someone who's, on online social media, I just tend to let it go, because I feel like you don't have to explain yourself to everyone time and again. Those who love you will definitely understand where you're coming from, and thankfully they now do. So yeah.
Yeah, so one of things I experienced, like I'm also from humanities background, so like a lot of people comment that you should have taken science or like commerce. So have you faced that kind of situation, and if yes, then how you like dealt with those situations?
So honestly, I was myself one of those people who wanted to take like physics, chemistry, maths. But as I mentioned, in 10th standard, I was like all into social sciences, geography and history and everything. And I scored like a full in 9th and 10th standard in social science. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm good at. So this is what I'm going to do. My parents were super chill with it. They were like, yeah, cool, take it. But then they told me, take maths if possible, along with humanities. And because I loved maths, and it was easier for me to do it because I really enjoyed doing mathematics. So I took up maths with humanities, which was a great experience because I think it's a very rare thing to occur in India. People don't usually get this kind of combination. So I was lucky in that case, I got this combination. But when I was studying too much of mathematics in 11th standard, my parents did say to me that, why not just take up PCM if you want to study so much of mathematics? But I guess they understood where my motivation came from and why I was doing, because I was good at it. And of course, there were like family and friends extended who wanted me to, why are you wasting your time on a subject like this? Why don't you do it? What will you become after this? But when they realized that, okay, I am motivated, they suddenly changed their direction to, Acha, okay, you've taken humanities, then become IAS. So I think this is the thing about Indian society, or any society for that sake, that they want to know what will happen next. So if you took PCM, they would know you would become an engineer. But if you took humanities, they are just uncertain, like what now? But if they make a certain goal for you, that okay, you become collector now because we want something to happen now. No, we need something concrete to look forward to. So they suddenly give you a title that, okay, you've taken humanities, become collector. Then it is acceptable. So it was like this only most of the time for me. Even now it is like this, that okay, when is she going to give you civil services now? But it's okay. I just tend to ignore most of it.
Okay, so yeah, that's quite inspiring. My next question is that since you have studied in Delhi University as well, Sophia College, and if I'm
No,
not
it's
wrong.
not in DU. No, it's not in Delhi University. I did
Okay.
not choose Delhi University.
Okay, so you have studied in like Sophia College. Yeah. And then you went to LSE. So how you like differentiate the experiences? Because like education in India and then London, how it was different. And then second part of question is like, most of people have like wrong impression about India, that India is not so much developed or people are not educated. So have you experienced any situation like if anyone commented you something about India and how you responded to that?
Okay. Okay. So I start with the second question. Luckily enough, I didn't face any kind of racism there. Everyone was very, very kind and very cordial. Even now, I'm constantly in touch with all of my faculty members. And only yesterday, I had this call with someone from LSE Careers and LSE Volunteers. And I think they just don't care where you come from. I was lucky to be in an institute which is based on the foundation of socialism and equality. So I don't think I would ever find someone there who would be discriminating. So luckily, it never happened to me there. The people are always like, standing like a pillar behind me, before me, beside me. Even now, they are constantly like, you need any kind of help, just turn to us, drop an email, call us. So they are amazing. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Coming to the first part. So, if you could just repeat in short what the first question was, I kind of missed it. About the comparison, right? India
Yeah.
and UK system.
Yeah, like how your experience were different.
So that I have to say, it was like poles apart. Now, when it came to India, I was more into, there is a certain charm about examinations. So you got to be like all buckled up for it, revise these notes, and your teachers would be just giving you copies and handouts and everything. That's very Indian, and it was how I studied. So till my third year, I had figured out that I wanted to go to LSE. So I dropped out of classes. I stopped going to lectures. I used to sit in library for all day. I used to research around like what was in like, so there was this one subject, financial markets, and there were lectures happening for it. Banking institutions, everything, there were lectures for it. I never entered into even one lecture of those topics, because I thought like, what is the point of me sitting in a classroom, the professor just reading out of something, me taking notes out of what she is reading out, and reading that small condensed information. So I just made it a point that if I have to go outside, I have to expand my knowledge base. So I started studying as much as possible, not just through textbooks, but through different blogs and websites and various places. But when I went there, it was still a hard way to go, because once I was there, it was difficult for me to because there were like 70 readings every week. So I was like, how do I read like 70 research papers in a week and remember all of them? Because we have been taught that if you have to do something, learn it. I remember like when I was a kid, I used to go to my mom with my book and say, Mama, I have learned. And she used to like listen it, Achha, okay, then tell me this and tell me that. So this was how all of us have been taught that you learn stuff. But there I was, so in the very first week, there was a session and we were told like, how should you study? If you have 70 research papers, how should you, learn them? Not learn them, how should you understand them? So what they told me was that, you don't have to remember everything. Just give a little space to your brain. What you can do is, if you have 70 papers, read the gist out of all of them. Don't mug every sentence, don't underline stuff. Read the paper, write a small paragraph on what the paper was about and what you learned out of it, and create a database of such paragraphs. The next time you have to think, okay, where should I read about decolonization, the easiest thing to do is go to this paragraph document and search for decolonization. Whatever paper was on decolonization, you must have written in the paragraphs. So pick up that paper and then read it. What is important is to manage the knowledge, because there's too much to know. You cannot learn everything. You cannot just, and what if I even learn everything? I would just go to an examination hall, vomit it out, write it somewhere, and just come back empty brain and empty hand, and it is of no use. But what is really useful is if I know how to manage my knowledge, if I know that this is how it is being segregated and this is how I got to use it. So if I don't know if you watched that show or not, Sherlock, have you watched it, the show?
Yes.
By Benedict Cumberbatch, Sherlock? So you remember the Mind Palace, hopefully.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that is by far the best strategy that you could use. Your Mind Palace doesn't have to be in the mind, I guess. It could be on your computer. But the best thing I learned at LSE was that there is too much information out there. And you're a human, you cannot learn all of it. But the best thing you can do is keep a track of that information. That the next time you have to go and know about something, you know where to find it. And I think that has been the best part about studying at LSE, and the whole difference boils down to this: learning versus retaining and gaining knowledge. So yeah.
So my next question is that like you left your UK civil servant job and then you came here, started working for sustainable development and other social initiatives. So like, would you like to share like how that journey started, like about GGI? And second is that like you're working for sustainable development and then women's sanitation. So what motivated for you this for like working for this only? Like there are other problems as well, but you're working for sustainable development. So yeah.
Right. So I think the reason why I chose to work for sustainable development was because it's very inclusive. So because and you've read all the 16 and 17 goals, that it's about everything. So if I chose to work on hunger, I would have to like specifically work on hunger. But working on SDGs, I know I am touching every aspect of it. But the primary reason why I chose to work on SDGs, the motivation came from this one session I had on Unacademy. So I was having this one live class, and I think there were like more than 500 people in it. And I just randomly tossed this question like, do you know about SDGs? And I mentioned sustainable development goals, and I put it out on the poll that do you know, yes or no? And I was surprised to see like only 3 people out of them knew what SDGs were. And technically, these were people who wanted to get into civil services, who wanted to, just affect people's life and, serve the noble cause and everything. So I was quite taken aback, like, where are we going if these people don't know about SDGs? And how can I person who's not studying for this, how can I expect a random engineer to know about SDGs if they don't know about it? So that's when I thought that maybe my motivation right now should be to work on capacity building, to work on awareness regarding SDGs. So when we thought of starting a green governance initiative, our plan was to work with ministries. Initially, we worked on small projects, like we worked in Ladakh for setting up a digital classroom. The remote office was in Delhi, and the classes were held for the 9th and 10th students in Ladakh through digital channels. Then we worked on a project called Breathe Jodhpur for air pollution. Then we were also working on Heritage Jodhpur for uplifting the different kind of, because Jodhpur is a very heritagey kind of city, so we were working on upgrading and renovating. But when I went through this whole charade of this Unacademy lecture, I realized that it made no sense to just keep on working on these kind of small things if we don't involve the people who are going to get affected. So by 2030, if we are not achieving these SDGs, the people who are going to get the worst affected are the people who are in the age group of 10 to 30 right now. They are the people who are going to get the worst affected. So if they don't know about SDGs, what is the whole point in working the whole government on it? So that's when we thought that let's do this. Let's work on awareness building and make people aware on what SDGs are, how should they work about it, and what is happening on SDGs around the world. So this was the whole plan. And then when it came to sanitation, as I said in the beginning, I was working, like I used to go with my father on field visits and everything. So when Swachh Bharat mission came into existence, he used to go to a lot of places, and he used to just convince the head of the sarpanch and everyone on why they should have it and how they should create awareness programs to generate people's interest in using toilets and everything. And he used to come home and tell me that it's no use, no one is actually going to use it, you cannot change their mentality, it's not going to happen. And we used to have long discussions around it, like, okay, this, but then what about this and what about that? And I think that's when I realized that I want to work on the behavioral aspect of it. I had seen people way up close who were, I'm sorry, Abhinav, I just have to take like a small call. Can I do it?
Yes, ma'am.
Abhinav, there's a small call I have to take. I take it?
Ma'am, your video is not visible.
I cannot hear you.
Yeah,
There's a small call. I take urgently. Can I take it?
yeah. Okay, sure.
Oh. Yeah, I'm done. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, right. So I'm so sorry. Where were we? I totally missed the track. I think I was
It's okay.
speaking with. Yeah. So
Okay.
what was the last question? If you could just run me through it once.
Okay, so
I think we're talking about GGI and why it came into existence. My dad and like working on sanitation. Yeah, it rings a bell now. So yeah. So when you used to talk about the behavioral aspect of it, that's when I realized like it's worth it to work on this sector. I had seen people up close losing, like women in those areas with whom I had personally talked, and then one day I just got to know like one of them died of certain disease because of bad sanitary conditions. So that's when I thought like it's actually important to look at this aspect more gravely than we were already looking, and it's not just enough to build toilets and give the families 12,000 rupees. So when Center for Advanced Studies in Policy Research approached me with this project on Arogya Rakshak toilets, I was instantly drawn to it because I was trying to work with World Toilet Organization on something similar in India. So I worked with them on this, and we started to build like a framework on what we can make mandatory in toilets in India. So we worked on making a framework for toilets for disabled people, toilets for women, certain checklists on what they should definitely contain. And that's how I think it went forward. And coming from that, we also saw that the crisis regarding sanitary pads is so real in India that just distributing them once isn't enough. So that's what we did. We then partnered with PSafe and we started working on distributing reusable sanitary pads to them. So that was the whole trajectory.
Okay, ma'am. So my next question is that like I was reading that you used to teach at an academy like when you were in college. So how like you used to manage, and were you like interested in teaching like from earlier time, or like it was from that time itself?
So I used to teach students for NSS because they were young students, like in fourth and fifth standard or second and third. So that was like something I used to do because it was a part of my community service. But so this is like an interesting story because I didn't apply to an academy to be an educator. I never did. I applied for a content creation job because I was not even job actually. It was just an internship I was looking for. So when I applied for it, I did not receive a response for almost 2 months. And I just forgot about it. Just like some random applications you do and just tend to lose if they don't reply. That's what happened. But I think in December of 2016, I got a call from the office. And I think at that time, there were only 4 educators. So they called me up and said that, would you be interested in taking up English? No, they didn't say that directly. They said that, okay, tell me about your academic achievements and everything. So I told them about my scores and everything. And then they said that, can you teach English? I was like, yeah, okay, I can try. But like, where do I need to teach it? So they told me that, there's an app called Educator app, record a video and do this. And we send the demo to Roman and everyone. So I recorded it. And then next day I heard that, everyone liked it very much. So yeah, let's go ahead. So I was not definitely interested in teaching. I don't like teaching a lot, I want to talk to people, because I think that's one way I can talk to young people and, you know, tell them exactly what I'm thinking. So that's one way I really like to interact with people. That's one way of interaction. But it's not something I ever wanted to be my career choice. So when I was working for Unacademy, I was only working for, that sounds selfish, for a stipend. Because I mean, I was a college student. I wanted to be independent. I was 18. I mean, I was 17, I guess, but I wanted to, like, you know, build up on my own and just have something of my own. So I started working because of that. But gradually, I think Unacademy gave me a lot more than what I taught there. I think it gave me beautiful connections with wonderful people. So most of the people I used to teach were almost my age, or they were probably elder to me. So I think I got to learn so much from them, and the kind of respect that I received because of this opportunity, it was something I had never imagined. So right now, I think I haven't checked Unacademy for very long, but I remember like I had some 80,000 followers and more than 3 million watch minutes, which was unbelievable. By that, for 3 million minutes, someone was watching me. Like not just one person, so many people, but they were watching me, and it's a pride that I believe now that I was able to give so much to people who were genuinely looking for information and knowledge. Even now, when I receive some kind of hacks on Unacademy, or it just rings up on my phone that someone commented, it just makes me so happy that, you know, I actually did something worthwhile. So yeah, and I think that, I mean, I left before it became purely subscription based. So I never went through this particular time, you know, the way Ashima was saying that education is free or not free. I think I was never a part of it when it was completely paid. I was a part when it was more free. So it gave me a joy also that everyone can access it. And the accessibility, as I said, is something I strongly believe in. So yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to say, congratulations to you that you have won so many awards.
Thank you.
So, like, how you felt like at that moment, and like how you celebrated, uh, like what was your reaction like when you?
So I guess I got to know about winning the Diana Award on 12th of May.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I didn't. I was like, no, I was in denial that I cannot win it. I mean, it's Diana Award. And I have been obsessed with Diana. I mean, I look up to her in every way possible, because I find that the way she broke out of places so rigid, you know, and she actually broke out and became a better person than what she was, and how she used every opportunity to create a difference in someone's life. I was madly obsessed with her life. And I mean, it was not just about, you know, the grandeur of being a princess. For me, it was more about a young girl getting into a kind of, you know, a rigid family or a rigid kind of condition, and then doing stuff for other people. For me, it was that more than any title that she had. This was my motivation. So when I heard that, okay, Diana Award, so my co-founder nominated me for it, and he didn't tell me about it. So on 12th of May, he randomly just, you know, forwarded an email to me, and it was written like, your nomination, Diana Award. So I thought that who did he nominate for Diana Award? So I just saw it and I was like, congratulations, your nominee Palak Sharma has won the Diana Award. And I was like, no, I didn't win it. I did not definitely win it. And I just sat for like, I think 2-3 hours, and I contemplated that, is it something that I have done, or is it plainly because they have sent a wrong email to the wrong person? Because I didn't feel like I had done enough to get something in her name. So that was like, I still take, like, you know, it's still hard time believing that it happened. And I just keep my, like, the certificate, I just keep it very close to me. So I just had this interview with a news channel right now, and the person asked me like, where is the certificate that you got and where's the award that you got? And I just like took it down from the table and gave it to him. So he said, you keep it ready? I said, no, because I just keep on looking at it all the time, because I just can't believe I have something in her name. So it is still unbelievable. I'm still not over it. When I got the Plan India Impact Awards, it was when I had already known that Diana is mine. So it was kind of an easy thing to take. I was like, okay, I can probably take it. But then again, the thing with me is I think that people think that I'm doing too much, but I'm not doing it. They don't know it. They don't know that I'm not doing it. And they're still thinking that I'm doing it and they're giving me things, but I don't deserve it. So that's what we call the imposter syndrome. So I have like too much of it. The Bangladesh Digital Social Innovation Award was extremely, surreal again, because the contenders, the competitors I got to know were from almost, I guess, 196 countries. It was impossible to imagine that, it was possible to get something out of so many people. Same was for Diana also, I mean, but it was in all something like the whole past week. It was something that was way beyond what I had ever experienced in my life till now. Comes to how I celebrated. So I do not live with my family. So when I told them that, okay, 28th is the day when the awards are going to happen, and I don't want to be alone, so I might think of coming to, my hometown. So they were like, yeah, okay, but don't come, enjoy on your own only, and just try to, do something fun. So one day before it, they told me that we are coming to meet you. So I think that was the highlight. I enjoy nothing more than having some really quality time with my family, and just, being in my most casual clothes and just hanging out with all of them, because I think that's the funniest thing I could do, funnest thing I could do. So yeah, I enjoyed it like that. We had our own little celebration with all those party poppers and cakes and everything, but we just made it like quite low. If things were better, my parents were very willing to like throw a party and everything, but I think I'm not ready to talk to a lot of people right now, and I feel very anxious in social settings right now because of COVID-19. So I guess it was better to keep it low profile this way. So,
Yeah. So, like one more question I would like to ask that since you mentioned that you are living far from your parents, so do you like feel like sometimes do you feel like sad or something like because
yeah.
so like at that moment like how you motivate yourself to keep calm?
So I have been living away from home, I think, but almost 5 years now. This is my 6th year living away from home. So I moved out when I was 17 for my undergrad, and since then I haven't actually been home. So it has always been like some city, some other city, and then for time being 1 month home before shifting to some other city. So I miss home a lot because I miss my family more than I miss the home. But what actually keeps me running is I have frequent visits to home. Right now, because of COVID-19, I couldn't go very often, but I go for frequent visits. I am an absolute crybaby. If I miss home, I cry my hearts out. I video call them and I cry on video calls. So it becomes easier to, just look at. I think video calls are a great thing. It makes so much more easier to live far away. But I make a point to visit home regularly wherever I am. I make it a point to visit in at least 6 months. I've never been apart for more than 6 months till now, because I believe like it's important to just go back and be at your safe haven at least once in 6 months. So yeah, that's what I do. But I think my family is also very good. They just visit me wherever I am. They try their best. If I cannot come, they just make it a point to visit themselves wherever I am. So
Yeah. So ma'am, I would like to ask that since you mentioned you are living far from parents, so like in today's time also like most of parents like when it comes to girl child they feel it's not safe for them like going in other cities. So like would you like to give any kind of message for those parents? And second part of question is like many of my friends are there, so like they wish to do something different, but they are just girls, so their parents say that you should only become doctor or do something like this only. So like would you like to give any message that they need to like change their mindset that time is changing and we need to change are thinking as well. So yeah.
Right. So I believe that if I say something to the parents, my one sentence to them would be trust your child. Trust that whatever decision they take would be in the right direction, right? And whatever they choose to do, if you see even a tiny bit of motivation and inflection in their eyes, make sure that you add up to the rest of the motivation. You give them the rest of the inspiration to keep working on that particular thing which they are passionate about. And it's not certain that, and I also believe this one thing, that parents, what they do is that if a child chose certain thing, didn't succeed in that, then they would just keep on reminding that kid that, okay, you asked for it but you cannot do it, so now do what I say. But it's not necessary that you would be successful everywhere. So parents have to accept that their kids are just kids. They have the right to experiment with things. They have the right to experiment with their own career choices. So if at one point of time they wanted to do something, they failed in it and they wanted to do something else now, allow them to be it. That way they'll be learning so much more than what you can teach them in 2 hours of your lectures. So maybe one way could be that. Second thing is to children, basically. If you are someone, if you're a young person, if you want to move out of your house, if you want to, go out and experiment with things, the first thing is the line between good and bad is very blurred. Okay. There's a lot of gray area. Something could be good for you, but it could be bad for your parents. So something could be looked as something very normal or casual for you, but it could be something very, very sinister for your society, for your parents. So you have to make sure whatever you do not hurt your parents, because they've trusted you. You might make choices that may feel like, by taking those choices, you're hurting them. But you first have to convince yourself that your choices are strong enough. Don't do things for just being a rebel and for the fun of it. That मुझे बस ये करना है क्योंकि ये करने में fun है. मुझे सिगरेट पीनी है क्योंकि सिगरेट पीने में fun है. That is absolutely a black area. वो बुरा है and it will remain the same. But when you have been offered a choice in life, and if you tend to choose something which is not very pleasing for your parents, make sure you have enough justifiable reasons to choose that, so that you can convince your parents. Because they love you. Whatever they do, they'll be doing for the love of you. They might be wrong. It's not absolutely true that wo hamesha sahi honge and they'll always go by the God's gospel, because they're human and you have to understand. Okay, when they raised you, they were kids. So my mom raised me when she was probably like 2 years elder to me. Yeah, I think she was 25 when she raised me, when she birthed me. And I cannot expect myself 2 years from now to raise a child in the perfect manner possible. So she might have made some mistakes in raising me, and it's absolutely fine. As long as I respect her, as long as I love her, as long as I can convince her for why my choices should be listened to and why my choices should be allowed, I think it is easier to go that way. So be a rebel, but be a rebel with reason enough to convince.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of practical advice which they can follow. So yeah, I would like to ask you that if you look at your whole journey, like from when you started, would you like to mention like any like turning point of your life which you believe uh, which brought about a lot of change in your life?
I think it has to be to go to study at LSE, because that just exposed me to a whole new world. When I was in India, I was like, yeah, civil services is great. And yeah, it is the best way to change things. But when I was there, it was like, the world is so wide. The smallest thing you do can create a whole ripple of change. So I think that is the biggest lesson I learned from there, and something that I want to use for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So my last question to you is that how you like look your journey like in a way that you must have faced a lot of ups and downs. So till now, how you see that journey and what are like your future goals? Like now you're working for sustainable development and other things. So what would be the things which you would like to work in future?
So summarizing the journey, I feel like I have been privileged enough to not have a lot of downs. It has been pretty smooth. I mean, there is this kind of opposition which I spoke about, which genuinely comes when you do something offbeat, but that is okay. I think you cannot convince people who have seen a certain way to success to just suddenly look at something else and believe that that is also success. So now I think my parents, those close relatives, would believe that okay, she's successful because now she has received certain things. But I considered myself successful the moment I chose to do a certain thing, because our success is what we are most motivated to do. If you found something in your life which you are motivated to do, that is success. You don't need to do like, you don't need to search for anything desperately after that. So I got my success pretty early on. So I don't, I was a self-satisfied person. I didn't want anything more. But when it comes to like other people, it was a bit of a flux, which is now, I think, in a better space. Secondly, if you could repeat the second question.
Yeah, so my question was like about journey, like how you see it, and then what you feel about ups and downs.
Future, everything. Right. So, right, the up and down, of course, I feel like there haven't been a lot of downs, as I said, so it was pretty smooth. Coming to what I want to do in future. So, as I said, sustainable development goals are the whole point right now. Till 2030, at least, we have to keep working on it. But I also feel that I have recognized that I lack in certain details, certain skills. So for the next 2-3 years, I want to work on gaining those skills. So my focus would be on running this whole, charade towards sustainable development goals. But apart from it, we are also focusing on climate change right now because the COP26 is approaching. So my one important issue right now is to look at the stories of climate change that comes from the smallest pockets of India. So that's one initiative we are working on right now, and that is something very close to my heart because when we read about colonization and everything, I just realized that how much information, how much knowledge we have lost to the West. So we need to actually get back to that source of knowledge. So I believe that that's the first thing I'm going to do. Secondly, as I said, I'm going to work on a few skills. I am looking to pursue a second master's right now, mostly in quantitative economics, because I feel my data analytics skills need a little brushing up. So I'll be working on my own skills because I feel like if I'm not competent enough, I can no longer contribute in any way. So you have to constantly keep on upskilling yourself. So that's going to be my second thing. I don't know how long I would be able to work in social development because I wish development had an end. Okay, now everything has developed. You don't need to work anymore. But unfortunately, it is not like that. So I think my entire life I would be working on this only. But I believe that certain issues like access to sanitation, access to menstrual hygiene, ending of period poverty, these are certain things I want to see ended in my very own lifetime. So however long I live, I want to see that these three things specifically have been achieved. So that would be my contribution. That would be my constant effort to make at least this successful.
Yeah, that's quite inspiring. Then one more question can I ask to you? That
Sure, please.
yeah, so in India, especially if you see like reading culture is not there. Like if you see the teenagers or even the college students, they just study for the exams. They like don't study for the knowledge or like exploring something. So what do you think that, how important it is at present scenario? So what do you feel about it?
So I think it's really important that the wider knowledge you can gain, the more dynamic you become as a person. So of course, it's integral right now to your own development to know as much as possible. Because see, if even if you want to get into a job, a normal job, it's not so easy right now. The competition is the toughest you could ever get in a century, and all of the people are almost as qualified as you are. So the decisive factor is your diversity, your vibrance. So that would definitely come from gaining more and more knowledge. But then that knowledge doesn't have to come from books always. Your knowledge could be coming from sources as diverse as YouTube, I said, or it could be coming from sources which are freely accessible. So you have to make sure that whatever sources you're using, even if you're using social media, you use it in ways which can enhance your understanding of the world, because the world is a complex place and it's getting more and more complex every day. So if you need to untangle even a tiny bit of it, knowledge is the only key to do it.
Yes, ma'am. So it was really a wonderful session with you. So
Similar.
I would like to mention one thing, like part of my suggestion that you're working on so many things. I used to watch your podcast as well. You have covered so many topics. So in future, like if it's possible, like if you can like make like some documentaries like on some social issues or like that, because when I watched your Unacademy videos, it was quite different from other educators, like how they used to teach. They used to teach like you learn this and try to approach this, but your way was different. So I guess when people will see you like on social topics, they will have a lot of interest. uh, so I guess if it's possible, like in coming time, it would be great. So yeah.
Perfect. I suggestion note. Thank you so much. I might have to leave now, but I'm so thankful for the entire interview. Thanks to Ashima also. And
Yeah,
thanks
Ashima,
Aruna. It was great
ma'am.
talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep me updated whenever and however you want any help or anything, right? So
Yes, ma'am.
anything you need around it, I'd be glad to.
Yeah, so
Thank
I
you, ma'am.
hope that like in future also, if possible, we'll have like more conversations like on other
Perfect.
issues
Yeah.
as well. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Thank you, Ashima. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Have a good weekend.